We're ready to roll?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for making time out of your busy day to sit in on this really exciting opportunity to talk with someone who is why we're all here, someone who is living with a form of dementia. My name is Mary Schultz, and I'm the Director of Education at the Alzheimer Society of Canada. We have a few ways that we're going to do this today, and this may sound familiar to some of you who were here when we've had a conversation with another person with dementia back in the fall, Jim Mann. We want to keep this really informal. Of course, you can see that we're taping, so just be mindful of that. But we do want to make it a conversation, an opportunity to have an honest conversation, no holds barred, about anything at all
Anything you want to know.
related to the experience of living with dementia. That said, Roger, of course, has the opportunity to say pass for any question that for whatever reason he doesn't want to answer. And we'll, of course, just then move on. So we do have, Roger has time past the hour. If you need to leave, of course, please do so as quietly as you can, but we may just go a few minutes over if need be. But also, I think you're happy to chat with people one-on-one afterwards as well. We are going to lunch, so I will make sure that that is not in jeopardy in any way, but we certainly will have time for one-on-one conversations as well. Because I'm facilitating the conversation, Roger and I have chatted about how I will maybe move him along if I want to make sure we're covering different things, but also I may end up cutting some of you off or giving other people a chance, so my apologies in advance, but as facilitator I'm going to try and make sure we keep moving, but also that everyone has an opportunity to pause and reflect and think about really what you really want to know about what it's like to live with dementia. We have all kinds of experience working with it at somewhat arm's length. Of course, many of us have family members as well, but this is a unique opportunity to really understand dementia from a different perspective. So I really challenge you to think honestly about what you're curious about, because you're open for that, and you have the opportunity to let us know if we're crossing any lines. So that's enough, I think, from me. Why don't you introduce yourself, Roger, to the group in any way that you think you'd like to.
Gee, I haven't thought much about it. My name is Roger Marple. I'm a father of 3 grown children, 1 ankle biter, grandson, 7 years old. I worked for Alberta Health Services for most of my working career, and I left work about, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, 2.5 years ago. I don't even know.
Okay, a while ago.
A while ago, due to the dementia. I've been living well with the disease, and learned a lot as time has gone on. I'm not sure what else to tell you. I live in Medicine Hat, Alberta. Lived in Calgary for 20 years. I did live in Ontario as a youngster, so I am somewhat familiar with Toronto and surrounding areas. So that's, the rest is you.
Perfect, that's perfect. And maybe I'll just add, so that everyone knows, that Roger is a member of our advisory group of people with dementia at the Alzheimer Society of Canada. Very active member. That's a group that guides all of our operations and all of our work. And of course, a big media star in our current awareness campaign. You'll see the poster behind us here. So has done...
I'm the handsome one.
This is being taped, Roger.
Oops, sorry.
So I think enough from us for now. We certainly have questions that you have contributed to us in the past, so we've got notes of those, but why don't we open it up? Is anyone brave enough to start things off with a question for Roger? Anything at all that you're wondering about?
Don't be afraid, I'm serious.
Go ahead, Pauline.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll start with one, and it's not an ease-in one, so...
No, sock it to me, I'm ready.
Time for
Yeah,
it.
I like that.
My mom lives with dementia as well. She's in advanced stages of vascular dementia, and one of the things that we've struggled with as a family is and you mentioned your children and a grandchild. Help me understand the family dynamics and how you have surfed around the diagnosis and the help, the support, and so on. Because that's something that's really interesting to me we're a big family. Some siblings are more involved than others. That's kind of normal, I suppose, in any family. But it's always something we need to work at together. And I'm interested in understanding how you, what your approach is and how I might learn from that.
I'm actually in a unique situation. I found out really early in my journey with this disease. It was a journey my ex-wife and I wouldn't be taking together. So we separated not too long after the diagnosis. And I basically find my own way. Lean on my doctor. I do have contact with my family, but there's no one near me. So we do talk. And I do have friends where I talk to and say, hey, be a pal, remind me about this and that. But for the better part, you know, I've always thought with the Alzheimer's Society, I've always wanted them to do a deep dive into memory techniques. Because I spend a ton of time learning memory techniques, and I've learned so much on how to remember because I don't have and I realize with the Alzheimer Society I like it not coming up because most times people are with a significant other, family member, and they just naturally lean on their memory. For me, I use 3-4 techniques to remember one thing. Like an example, boy, I could talk hours on memory, but I'll give one example. Most of my, when I wake up in the morning, I love my cat up, I feed it, I make a coffee, I go to my computer, I read news online. So I time my memory prods to come up when I'm on my morning thing. I time it in a natural way because if it's not in a natural way, you'll forget. So, okay, the memory comes up, you know, I check my email and says, oh yeah, doctor's appointment, 10 a.m. It's 8 a.m. in the morning. I immediately get up. I walk to the timer on the stove. That timer is my best friend. I use it for everything. I set the timer for half an hour lead time to get to the doctor's appointment because it's very possible I'll forget from the time I read that timer. So a lot of what I've learned living with dementia is I've learned on my own, you know. So I'd love to see a deep dive with you guys and share that information with people with dementia. You talk about whiteboards, post-it notes. That's just scratching the surface. To memory techniques. But from a family dynamic, I don't involve them too much.
And I'm not sure your situation is all that unique, right? I think we know that lots of people live alone with dementia, and you're quite right, we haven't focused on it as a society. We're starting to look at what that's like when people live in long-term care when they're alone. It's another whole dynamic.
Yeah, but
living in the community the way you are,
there's
absolutely.
Tens of thousands of people in the functional stages.
Absolutely.
And it'd be nice to see some focus towards that, right? Anyway, I'm critiquing you.
No,
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's very important. Thank you very much. I think those tips and tricks of memory.
They're huge, and not just that, other things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Deep dive.
We're noting that down. Anything else? Another question for Roger. Yeah.
I was just wondering, how was your experience kind of navigating the healthcare system? I guess you were in Alberta at the time, because I have a close family member, and so when they were first being diagnosed, they got the runaround, and because they got the runaround, they felt like they weren't being taken seriously. They don't want to go anymore to the doctor. So I'm just wondering how your experience
Is that, I need to ask you, they suspect dementia?
Yes.
And the
Initially,
doctor's
yeah.
blowing them off kind of thing, is that it? Or just doubting them, or?
I don't think they were doubting that person. They were just not, the questions that the person was asking, they felt like they weren't taking them seriously. And then being, I guess it was more so not being taken seriously for certain questions. I don't know the details, but
Okay.
I guess the runaround, because I know here in Ontario there's so many, like you go through a bunch of specialists, and so like, I don't know, they felt like the they kind of got a runaround. So it was very overwhelming, the process of being diagnosed.
Okay. But I had a few advantages. I worked 25 years with Alberta Health Services, so I was very familiar with how things work. But my own personal experience when, yeah, I hear a lot of stories like that. But for me, it went very naturally. For example, when I finally approached my doctor, it came to a head. Like, one thing about dementia, it sneaks up on you really slow. And so what happens is, and we all have this ability, we have this remarkable ability to do what I call workarounds. We would do, I'm trying to find the word for it, process mapping. I'm sure you've heard about process mapping. So we would do that a lot with Alberta Health Services in processes for my staff. So we would do a deep dive in what they would do, and we would find all sorts of workarounds, right? So here's how you do this process. And all of a sudden we'd say, the process is broken here, but they figured out workarounds, right? So it's a natural ability. So it's like that with dementia. So what happens is your memory starts going, but you just naturally put in aids, that kind of thing. And when it came to a head for me to see a doctor, I sent a spreadsheet to my boss, and he sent it back, an Excel spreadsheet, and he says, "My God, what is this?" And I reopened it, and it made no sense to me. So anyway, I went to my doctor, and I said, "I don't know what's going on, but I'm not feeling good." I explained the memory issues, and she goes, "Well, we'll just test you for everything." That was how it started. And then from there, she called me in the office a week later, and she says, "You have diabetes." I go, "Oh, well, that explains why I'm not feeling good. That explains my memory." And she goes, "No, diabetes doesn't give that." And then she sent me to a neurologist. And then a year and a half later, diagnosis, long story short. So where your family member, is it a family member?
Yeah.
They're not getting a referral, correct?
They got a referral, but I guess it's more so, not, like, it's almost like, I guess they felt like they were more so a number in the healthcare system, not a person.
Oh.
You know, so they felt like what they were saying is like, it's kind of like the neurologists or doctors already had something in their mind before the person came into the office, you know.
See, that's not my experience. When I met the neurologist, I was surprised on the in-depth, what's the word?
Assessment?
Yeah, assessment. He really went over me head to toe, physically, and ran a number of tests. And then he sat down for half an hour explaining what it could be. He said it could be a vitamin deficiency. It could be, what's the
Brain
word?
tumor?
Thank you. I will play Find the Word with you today. Or it could be dementia. And he even explained curable dementias, like he really educated me. So I had an idea what was going on right from the get-go, and to have this experience from a neurologist,
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you didn't have that problem.
Say again?
I'm glad to hear that you didn't have
No,
that
it was a
runaround
very
or that
natural
like
process,
mistrust.
and I was hoping it was a vitamin deficiency.
Yeah.
Depression, who knows, right?
I was going to ask you what that year and a half was like for you, because the options you were given are not particularly desirable. Brain tumor, dementia.
Yeah.
What was that like for you, the
well,
waiting
I
the waiting
was
period?
somewhat struggling even then, and he put me on a dementia medication,
I see.
and Aricept,
Right.
even before the diagnosis, just so you know kind of how it could work. And that made me nervous in itself. But it was a long process. And they test you and unfortunately I can't remember the details, but MRIs, they test you for possible tumors, they test you everything from syphilis to just absolutely anything that could be causing cognitive. I remember my doctor said we even tested you for syphilis because that can,
Sure.
you know, so I was surprised with all the things they were telling me, and I can't remember it unfortunately, but they really test you. And that's why it takes so long, because they're ruling out absolutely everything until there's just no other. And on top of that, when I was on the Aricept, my memory was getting worse. Just before the diagnosis, I was having a hard time remembering my staff's name, who I'd worked with for 6 years, you know. You know, and I'd had their names written beside my desk, so I'd look back to, I'd go, Shane, you know, that kind of thing. So I knew, even before I was diagnosed, I was in trouble. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but the big thing is that they're seeing a neurologist, and by God, they will get to the bottom of it, regardless of mannerisms or,
Yeah.
you know.
I found it interesting that you said they went through everything and they ruled out everything before they gave the diagnosis, because I think in my experience they just threw out the word dementia before anything was said. So
Well, sometimes it's blatantly obvious. How old are they?
they're 60s.
Pardon?
60s.
Well, then they'd be more cautious at that age. There is times where it's blatantly obvious. It could be something else, but it's so clear, you know, but especially at a younger age. But tell them you can live well for quite a while.
Thank you.
Laurel
I'm
Ann,
a
you
big
have a
believer
question.
in hope.
Sorry, Roger.
Yes,
Laurel Ann, go ahead.
Not too personal, but
No.
I was interested in the lead up to the diagnosis, if your memory loss or what was going on was affecting, like did your wife notice it at the same time, or was she telling you, oh, you're doing this or not doing that? And at what point the strain or whatever it was caused you to separate? Like what made that happen?
Maybe you can pass if there's something that seems a bit too personal.
Oh, no, I'll say it like it is. We had a real bumpy spot right after diagnosis, and what I mean is I questioned the Aricept. I said, my memory's getting worse, and the neurologist said, and this is right at the time of diagnosis, he says, sometimes there's only 4 medications out there worldwide, right? And he said, sometimes there's other medications, limited choices, that might work better for you, and it turns out it did. But what happened was, and it was a very humiliating experience for me, he said, tell you what, let's try you on a different medication. And I said, sure. And he said, what we're going to do is wean you off the Aricept and then slowly build you up. It's quite a process because these aren't drugs that you just stop
Right.
and start, right? And so you have to wean off slowly and then slowly build up on the new medication. So what happened was, what he didn't tell me was what happened to me. So 3 days into weaning off the Aricept, I had a high-profile job, patient safety. I overseen Southeast Alberta. I had a lot of people under me, and if I screw up, quite frankly, someone can die. You know, so they were watching me like a hawk. So anyway, 3 days. He said, you screwed up on this. And we have regional shared drives, and we have serious technology, as you well imagine, and we can share computers. And I'm just scrambled. I'm scrambled, and I didn't see it coming. And he said, well, you screwed up here, and you just screwed it up. And I go, oh, God, sorry. And he said, so show me what you did wrong. and he jumps on my computer. I couldn't even remember where the shared drive was, let alone, I couldn't even remember how to access what it was that I needed to show him. And he says, my God, Roger, you need to go home now. Oh yeah. And he says, I don't want to see you back here until abilities management, there's departments, big 100,000 employees, right? Until abilities management gives you the all clear. So it was very humiliating. And so I go home with my tail between my legs and just upset. And from there it got worse. And I was just a mess for a month. And that really shook her up. And it, you know, a couple months after that, we parted ways. Does that answer your question? I think it just shook her up, you know, and you know, in all fairness, we all know that care partners, loved ones, I've seen people, I've talked to a lot of people, and they're wounded for life, right? You know, from their experience, it didn't go well. And you know, she says, I'm not doing well with this, you know, and I said, I love you, you know, it's okay, you know, and we went our separate ways, you know, so that was that, you know, and I still love her, and I still want her to do well and happy, and she's moving on with her life, you know, so you gotta watch out for the other person too. It's not just me, it's everyone, right? You know, so.
That sounds like that was a pretty dark time, and you talk
It
about
was
that
extremely
as a dark time.
dark then.
What started to turn that around for you? Can you name a few things that where you, when you look back, you think that's when I started to feel like life was still worth living, or it was still a good place, or what helped you?
At that time, I was recently, you know, and I suspected I had dementia, blah, blah, blah. So they say, okay, you got dementia. And, you know, my story isn't much different from anyone else. But I was familiar with dementia. I did a lot of consulting. And at one time, there was a chain of care facilities that fell under the Alberta Health Services umbrella, and it was my job to onboard them. So it was called the Care West Group, and they were seniors care facilities. So my job was to go in there, set them up with the supply chain management, and then set them up with supply services. So these people are just overwhelmed, and they have no idea. So, you know, they'd say, well, I have IT people. And I'd say, okay, no problem, I'll set you up with so-and-so. They'll help you with your IT issues, because security, and they're just a mess as an organization. Or they'd say, we have this problem. Oh, no problem, I'll get you set up with food services. I'll get you set up here, there.
Lots of problem solving.
Yeah. And I just get them going. So I'd go in one facility, the next. So I'd spend a considerable time at each facility, and there was one facility that really jumped out at me, and I would call it the problem children for dementia people, violent people, that kind of thing. And this was a long time ago, and I know practices are changing, because I know people in Alberta Health Services, but you'd spend 2-3 weeks in this facility, and there's people tied to chairs and shit-filled diapers, and just even with a person without dementia, it's a holy shit, you know, it's a wow, you know. So, but this was a problem facility. They're not all like that in the end, but I've seen different levels of dementia, so I was quite familiar with it. What was the question?
So I'm wondering how you feel that you got out of that dark place.
So anyway, this is what I'm picturing.
Okay, this is your future.
This is where I'm going, and I seen it up close and personal. It wasn't a generalized thing. I seen in detail, And I'm going, damn. And to be honest, I was in a very dark place. And, oh, another thing, and this is super important, first link. Holy cow, you guys got to make that work. You absolutely have to make that work. Because what happened was when I was diagnosed, he talked about medications, he put me on a vitamin regime, he says, see you in about 3 months and we'll see how you're doing. Out I go. So the first thing I did was, I never missed work. So even after my diagnosis, I went to work in the next day, but needless to say, I wasn't thinking much about work. And when I got home, first thing I did was, you have 1,000 questions because of course when you're diagnosed, you're kind of stunned, right? And I Googled Alzheimer's, and the first hit I get is a YouTube video, and it's a video of a family member documenting the stages of the disease, and there's 1,000 videos out there. So this is my first exposure. And I see this person in mild stage, moderate stage, end of life. Watch it. Click on the next one. Oh, another one. Mild, moderate. And they're ugly. You know, they really stress on the, you've seen them, end of life. And this is my introduction to dementia, right? And then I click on another one and it's someone giving a lecture on how to manage people with dementia. And I go, Jesus, you know, this isn't good, this is not good. And most of the general media out there, it's very depressing. And even if most people, even with dementia, they tend to gravitate to the issues they're having, right? And if you've ever heard me talk, read anything I've read, anything I've done, whether it's a webinar, I never talk about my personal issues. I will with you. But you've never ever heard me say, I have memory issues and I struggle here, I struggle there. It's always feature, benefit, and I do it for a reason. And I do it by design because there's so much depression and there's so much concentration on the challenges and all this. And people with dementia, they get that quickly. They need positive. It's called hope. And whenever I talk about hope. And here's the benefit of hope. Here's what it does. I talk about stigma. And if you've read my thing, I present this is stigma, but this is what we can do about it. So all my conversations are well thought through and by design. Question again? What was the question?
You were starting to talk about how beneficial First Link was for you.
Yes.
So
oh yeah. See, I told you.
No, it's fine. So that sounds like something we should
Yeah,
hear more about.
Yeah.
But also,
well,
if
it was Jim Mann video.
Okay.
That's what turned me around. I'm clicking through this, and this is over a passage of time, right? And one day I just seen a video, and oh, that's a guy with dementia. Click on that, right? Because you're really curious to hear. And I swear to God, I watched it 3 times in a row, and it was that BC one.
Yeah.
And what really grabbed me was here's a guy. He's got challenges, but look at him. He's living his life, and it was like an epiphany moment for me. Like it was like a light bulb came on, and that happened with another person who watched Red Bat,
Yes.
that Red Deer
Yes.
guy. Same thing,
Yeah.
and it was like a light bulb went on, and then from there, I seen a link to the BC Alzheimer Society. Oh, click. Oh, look at this. And now you're talking. Now you're talking organization, staged information, super organized, credible research. And then I just stuck to that. You know, from there I went to the Canadian Alzheimer Society. From there I went to the Alberta Alzheimer. Oh, there's different things. You know, you assume that they know that you're there. You don't, you know, unless you're told. So that's why if I was pointed to you guys right from the get-go, it would have been a totally different story. You have to make that first link fly.
So what I'm hearing, if it's fair to say, what really helped you and would have helped you even more if it had been earlier, would be to hear from people who are in the same boat as you
Big
are,
time,
who are
huge.
making positive lives out of living with dementia, and getting connected to evidence-based, credible information and support early,
Yeah,
which
and
is
it's
basically
staged
first
too,
link.
so you can kind of, you know,
you
if
can
it
take
get
it-
a little much, I'll go back
Take
visit
in as
it.
much as you can at a time.
Well, there was a lady who seen me on Global, and this is such a cool story. It was heartwarming. Her husband, I believe, from what she told me, was about to be diagnosed, and this is it just reinforced how I thought. She somehow found me on Facebook from watching me on the news, and she gets hold of me, messaged me on Facebook. I had a number of people from across Canada message me, a lot of way to goes, you know, but this one in particular was heartwarming. And all she said was, my husband's about to be diagnosed, and she told me what was, and I believed her, and it sounds like he's about early onset. And she said, I couldn't help but notice you've been living with the disease for 2.5 years. She's looking for hope,
Yeah.
right? And I emailed her back, and like it was a week or so before I even noticed it, you know, like a little slow in the draw, but I said, oh, message. And what I did was, she goes, could you tell me what the disease is like? Can you tell me what to expect? And I basically said, I want your husband to know that it's extremely possible to live well, although it's different for everybody. I've been accused of sugarcoating dementia,
Okay.
right, on public media. You're sugarcoating it. And their thoughts are, we're going to die, right? And I said, well, I get that, buddy, but we all live with this terminal condition called life. It's about how well you live, right? You know, and I know how this disease goes. But anyway, I told her, number one, I know a lot of people that live well with this disease. That's the first thing I told her, and have been for quite a while. Number two, I'm going to give you a link to this blog I wrote. It's called Hope in the Face of Alzheimer's. And I'm going to give you a blog to the campaign, and I'm also going to give you a blog to the Ontario Alzheimer, because she was from Ontario. And I said, promise me you'll reach out to your Alzheimer Society, because I have two big supports. One is my doctor, amazing, and two is my Alzheimer Society. I said, those will be your biggest supports. Promise me you'll reach out. And read this, right? So anyway, she replied back, and she goes, when my phone went off, she said, I cried when you replied, number one. She was quite emotional. And that kind of, whoa,
Yeah.
you know. And she said, I want you to know how powerful your message is, because I Googled your name and I've read all this. You know, so that's what people want. They want hope. In your job as an organization, in my eyes, job one is hope. Because if they don't have hope, medications, diet, exercise doesn't mean a thing. So when you meet someone with dementia, you really need to get across to them, first and foremost, in my opinion, hope. Give them hope. And then everything falls into place. So that's my
Fascinating.
thing for you. Your job one is hope.
There's a lot of messages in there for us,
No,
because we
just
struggle.
saying,
I think
you
it's fair
asked
to
me to
say we
talk,
struggle.
yeah.
We struggle with the balance of not sugarcoating, providing hope,
Oh yeah, it's
being
important they
realistic,
know it.
getting
They'll
good
figure that
information.
out quickly
It's
anyway.
challenging, but you're giving us a way forward. Let's talk about some other questions people might have. Yeah, Laura.
Kind of a weird question,
No, no.
but I met someone once who lives with terminal illness, and he says that he sees that as a blessing because he knows number of years left here, he knows that he's going to die, so he's gonna make the most out of that. So
Yep.
he's been on movies, he's been on TV shows, he's done everything he can because he knows death is coming.
That's what
soon.
I'm doing.
So I'm just wondering, when you got, obviously as your outlook of dementia changed, how has the diagnosis made you do things that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have done?
Okay, number one, I had a job I loved, right? So it's hard to find a job that you really enjoy going. I made a lot of difference, made a big impact, and I knew what I did made a big impact, and I loved my job, and I loved everyone I worked with, and so when I left that, holy crap, it's very high-paced job, very multitasking, 100 mile an hour, and I liked it that way. That's why I enjoy when you guys give me things to do. I still enjoy that. No, I enjoy that pace, right? So, okay, so I was working 100 miles an hour right till the minute I walked out the door. I walk out the door, trust me, I shed a tear. And then I'm sitting there at home, patting the cat.
Yeah.
Right? Now what, right? And my eyes turned to you guys, right? And I adopted you. Here I am. You know, so you still need purpose. You still need purpose. You need, and I told myself, at least I have the luxury of picking what means something to me. And I told myself, whatever I get involved in, I'm going to make damn sure it has deep meaning for me, right? You know, because after a day or two of sitting at home, you're like, I'm very high-powered, you know, so I get bored extremely fast. I've always, okay, with dementia, or everybody here, you have this mindset of, I'm not going to assume you're thinking this way, but a lot of people think this way, is you're happily ever after. I'm going to work, I'm going to retire, I'm going to do the things I like to do. So when it comes to terminal illness, all you got to do is make your happily ever after now, right? You just got to shift your happily ever after. It's always later, and people think because you're going to die, right? Now my happily ever after is gone. Bullshit. You know, you can just, your happily ever after is now, and that's what your friend is doing. And I bet you a lot of people, if you can get past the problem people have with dementia, and I see it over and over, is you get it, and with the caregivers, or I call them loved ones. I'm going to call them loved ones from now on. I don't like the term caregiver personally. You know, and the loved ones. And I see it over and over and over, and watch for it. You will see it. They're stuck in this rut. So the rut I was in, but I turned myself around, but I see people, and it's because they're not reaching out to you, and they haven't, right? And they're in this rut, and they can't get out of the rut, you know. So I make it a point to, hey man, you have a condo in Mexico, right? Yeah, well, go. You know, have fun. Holy shit, you like golf? Go play golf. I'll go with you. You know, that kind of thing, you know. So I don't think it's that indifferent for anyone that can get past the, get your head around it, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I know people that are just having a heyday. You know, they're having a good time. They're getting out every chance they get. I chase fun shamelessly. If I think it's fun, yeah, that looks like fun, I think I'll go, you know, whether it's a home show or, you know, just anything and everything, you know, and tell your friend, go hard.
Words to live by.
Yeah, you should go hard now.
Yeah.
You don't know what's
it's
around the next corner. Get out and have fun. Holy shit, don't wait for later. Do it now.
Other questions for Roger? Yes, Andrew.
Hi, you talked about your job and how much you loved your job, and a couple times you touched upon the impact of your diagnosis while you were still working. And I just was curious about how that impacted your job, you know, how you left.
Really good
Were they
question.
supportive to you?
Really good question. I did a webinar on Ascent Cafe, it's called.
Yes.
And I dove into that. But it was interesting. And I'm going to tell you some things I didn't say at the webinar. Okay. The day before I told them my diagnosis, I had a new boss. We're getting to know each other.
That's hard.
So we're feeling each other out. And although he was nothing short of a genius, and he was a director, I answered to a director, and I loved the guy. He just had this wisdom thing going on, you know, you just knew you and I are going to be good friends, right? Like he didn't have an ego, you know, and
That's rare.
yeah, and he wasn't above. He had serious management experience, of course, being in the position he was in, but he was weak on supply chain management. So he could walk into any, like he was in charge of research for Alberta from the biomedical. That's his background. So the guy's just, you know, off the charts, you know, but he knew very little about supply chain management. And he was constantly calling me. And he goes, this is going on and that's going on, and we have a product recall, and it's a provincial product recall, and they're freaking. I said, don't sweat it. We can sub it with this, you know. And so he was constantly coming to me and said, what about this? What about that? And I said, don't sweat it. And I had 25 years experience, and I just keep grooming him in the supply chain end of it. So we complemented each other. So the day before my diagnosis, he was just singing the praises. You're great, you're awesome, you're wonderful, blah, 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 what a great person you are. I said, great, you know, so you're feeling good, you know, and things are going well. I get my diagnosis, I wait a couple days. I believe in being transparent and open. I said, okay, so prior to my diagnosis, he knew I was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment prior to my diagnosis. And he knew that. And I said, hey, listen, you know, I got a diagnosis, I have dementia. First thing he says, this is what he didn't say in the webinar, you need to leave now. Do you realize, he's shaming me. He's shaming me. Don't repeat this, but he's shaming me, saying, what if you screw up? What if patient care is impacted? You need to leave and leave now. And that was his knee-jerk reaction. And I'm listening to him, and I'm shocked. And I'm trying to get my head around my response. And I said, no, I can do this. I'm still fine.
Wow.
You can run me off if you want, but I'm not leaving, you know, and when I'm ready, I'll leave, but not until. So anyway, make a long story short, you know, it was a relatively cold conversation, and, you know, I hung up the phone and I'm rattled, and, you know, and you got a diagnosis, and then you're getting this, and then your wife is thinking about leaving you. I blew the motor in my car, and like, I was just, Jesus, you know, like, what else can go wrong, you know? It was a rough time, you know. So anyway, the very next day, he calls me up. Like, we had these morning, what we call huddles, and we do a regional Southern Alberta roundabout and talk about, you wouldn't believe what you talk about, but we talk about whatever, and okay, and then we start our days. And he says, yeah, I thought about it, and I'm going to look into this. And I said, you do that. And he works for Alberta Health Services. Jesus, there's dementia experts. And I said that. I said, there's dementia experts. We didn't work in the same town. but I knew the hospital he worked in, and I was well connected, and I knew different disciplines of medicine. I said, talk to so-and-so. She's a dementia expert. And he says, I'll do that. So I'll tell you, after that, he was my best supporter.
Wow.
Best supporter. And he'd ask me all the time, he'd go, and he meant it too. He was a kind person. It was just a knee-jerk reaction, right? And he would, and he meant it. He would go, how can I support you? And I said, I don't know, I'll think about it. And I was struggling with memory, of course. And we had regional shared drives, and everything is networked. And I'd go in this shared drive, I'd go in that shared drive, I'd work on this, I'd work on that. And everything with Alberta Health Services is done provincially, not in your area, right? So you had to really have serious computer skills. So anyway, I couldn't remember half the, so what I did with him, I said, well, there is something you can do for me. I said, if I can't remember something, I want to feel comfortable asking you to remind me of something. I don't want to feel awkward. And he says, fair enough. And he was true to his word. So what would happen would be, I'd say, I need to go work on this spreadsheet and it's thing. He says, oh yeah, I know what it is. I said, so how do I get to it? And he says, click on this shared drive, click on that shared drive, and sometimes you'd have to go 5 or 6 steps just to find the file you want to work on. And he says, and then he'd start explaining, okay, this is how it works. Come back to me. I got it. And he says, okay, you okay? Yep, good. Hang up the phone and you continue on. You know, so it was a wonderful working relationship. And he did support me, and I did ask him. There was one time, I worked for close to 2 years after the diagnosis, but I can remember, maybe it was a year into it, and I was having a horrendous day. I mean, horrible day. I couldn't think. I should have went home. But I never booked sick. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting nothing done. And he calls me up asking me something. I answer and I said, I really don't know how much I can keep going, you know. And he goes, don't worry about it, man. You're doing a great job. I'm here for you.
Wow.
Eh?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Should everyone
you know?
be so lucky?
Oh,
But you made that happen.
What a boss.
Yes.
What a
You
boss.
made that happen.
Yeah, so that's what I mean about being a great support. And that gave me motivation to keep going. And it got better after that. It was just a super bad day, you know. But at that moment, I was questioning, I don't know if I can keep going. But we made a deal that, and I said, we got to be honest here. If I get to the point where I honestly don't feel I can keep going, I'll let you know. Or if you get to the point where you think I should go, don't worry about my feelings, right? You let me know. And that was the deal we made. Yeah. And he let me know. He
Fair
said,
enough.
time to talk about how did he put it?
Transition.
Transition. Transfer of knowledge. He was really worried about that
Yes.
plan. And I took the hint. So a month or two after
very
that, I was done.
Powerful story.
Well,
We're-
good. That's why I'm here.
We're unfortunately getting close to being out of time. And
Really?
I'm wondering,
Since
I know.
we just started. Holy cow.
I'm wondering if there's any final question that anyone has.
It might be a tricky one as well, but always comes to the financials when the people are now without work. And how do you manage that, Roger? And it's never enough to say, is that a burden as well?
You have to.
Could be
The financial impact.
aspect of
Everything. Yeah, I don't know how it's going to be in retirement. I did have a pension going on, and I had paid into it for quite a while. So I'm hoping, and I got to call them up and just say, where am I at with that? You know, so I'm hoping between the pension and, of course,
Government
CP,
things.
you know,
Mhm.
I'll land on my feet. So the answer there is I'm not sure. But I had paid into it for quite a while, but what's heartbreaking is the last 10 years
Yeah.
is when it really pays off, and I had to walk away just as it's really starting to pay dividends, so that was really hard. I'm on a disability, and you don't get rich working for Alberta Health Services, but they take care of you from a benefits point of view. So I'm pretty well making what I made when I was working,
Good.
within $100. Yeah, because it's a non-taxable benefit, right? So financially, I'm making what I made at work. So, you know, from a month to month, I'm doing okay. So I got lucky. I know people that have nothing. They have no benefits, and they have to go on, I don't know what they call it here, but ASH. They call it ASH in Alberta. Oh, it's ugly.
Okay.
Bare minimum to live on. And I'm sure you call it something else,
Yeah.
but
Family
there's a lot of
benefits or something,
people,
yeah.
you know, they're getting by on $1,000 a month or $1,200, whatever it is
Yeah.
they pay. And that's not uncommon either, but in my case, I landed on my feet. Like I said, you didn't get rich working there, but boy, they took care of you from a benefits point of view.
Well, I think, Roger, unfortunately, we need to close up the group conversation, but what a positive way to end things in terms of a phrase like
Was it
landing
good
on
for
my
you, or
feet.
was it beneficial, honestly?
I think
Good.
you've landed on your feet in so many ways
Yeah.
that I'm sure, I certainly feel so inspired by your story, because we do try so hard to do what you're saying, help people understand that life goes on while not sugarcoating it, as you say.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's,
a voice like yours is the authenticity that we need in giving that message. Why should they believe us? They need to believe people
well,
like you.
some of the most powerful voices I've heard is people with dementia.
Exactly.
So I do get that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for your candor,
was
for your
totally my
openness.
I enjoyed
and
it.
I'm glad, because I know that we did, and I want to thank everyone for your honesty and your openness, because I think these were some tough questions. I'm not sure I would have answered them all. So
I think I landed on my feet.
I think you did. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Roger. And if you are interested in staying back with another question
Yeah,
or
it's
two
in
for Roger, I know that we've
I'm
got
here
the
for
time
you
to
today.
do that.
It's my day is
And
your day.
This is a little thank you from all of us.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.